Hi all, I have another fascinating game to show you from TCEC Season 19, Ethereal playing with the white pieces against Leela. Let's have a look at this game. So knight f3, knight f6, we enter into a Grunfeld defense because d5 is played here. d4, this is like a neo-Grunfeld transposition. b3, bishop f5, bishop b2, knight e4. This is the end of the book given to them. And here actually, in a World Chess Championship match, instead of knight e4, Vishy Anand had the black pieces with and played knight bd7. And after knight c3, there was d takes c4, and it led to a quick draw by repetition. I seem to remember Magnus Carlsen saying he had to put the brakes on because he realised he really didn't get much from the opening. So this is a kind of backdrop at, to this game. But here, yeah, we don't see knight bd7. We see knight e4 being played by Leela. So it looks like quite an aggressive knight plunge. We have knight h4, bishop e6, queen c2, and the knight comes to d6 now. C takes, knight c3, and now knight c6. This is tactically possible to do this. e3 is played, ignoring d5, the d5 pawn. If knight takes d5, the punishment comes in the form of bishop takes knight b4, and after queen c5, not taking on d5 as you might expect, but actually playing a5, and this leaves black with a better position. The threat here is rook c8, and if the queen moves, then taking on d5, and if e4, it looks like big trouble there. And my main variation that I've pre-prepared from this position is actually the bishop dropping back, and here black would play rook c8. There's not too many squares for the queen, and after bishop f6, we have black using rook c2 and getting active like this, for example. It's an advantage to black. So the whole thing, essentially, it does seem to backfire. It's quite subtle, but it does seem to backfire, this whole thing. So e3, just avoiding that altogether, taking on d5. And we have here black playing a forcing move, so the knight blocks in the bishop now. Bishop f5, hitting the queen. Queen goes to e2. e6, protecting g5 now. We have bishop a3, bishop f6, rook ac1, rook e8. Again, this position, black looks solid, and it seems actually Leela has actually achieved something. This rook can come over here, and it looks kind of cozy to have the two rooks here. And, with this g5 pawn, it looks as though black stands well, visually, at least. If we look at how it evolves, bishop g6, knight a4. Okay, white's got the c5 square. We have bishop h5, and this provokes some dark square weaknesses now to kind of unpin. So h3, trying to kick the bishop with g4, but some dark square weaknesses are emerging there. In the meantime, we have rook e7, and the bishop drops back to b2, rook c8. So some dark square weaknesses provoked, g4, bishop g6, and now knight e5. And here we see rook ec7, not minding about double pawns or the light square bishop. And Ethereal does take on g6. Maybe this is like a built-in heuristic to just get the bishop pair and inflicts structural damage. This is the very thing that wins often games for neural networks against classical AB engines. If this is a heuristic kind of built into the AB engines, this kind of bias, it's creating a semi-open H file, a dynamic road for later, and so its potential to backfire in the longer term is there. The seed is set, even though it seems as though black has relinquished the bishop pair. in this structure, if you looked at the light square bishop, there's a lot of pawns actually on dark squares. It's sort of firing at thin air anyway, the bishop across that diagonal. Okay, maybe cutting out a few moves, but it wasn't that useful. And we have here, you know, this semi-open h file, which could actually be useful soon. We see knight c5, and the bishop drops back, unblockading the f pawn. So f5 is actually on the cards if there wasn't knight takes e6. And Leela prepares basically f5 after bishop f3, queen e8, protecting e6. Queen d2. For the moment, actually, a5 is played. And now queen e1. But here, f5, very interesting. f5, very, very interesting. White clearly, in principle, doesn't want to undouble the pawns here, and just drops back the bishop. On g takes, as an example, this position, it seems that the rooks are quite versatile here. This rook and this rook, they have versatility to come over to the king side. And if you contrast them to the white rooks are not so versatile in this position. This extra versatility seems to have been facilitated by the temporary acceptance of double pawns and undoubling them here. In this variation, it essentially seems as though black gets a winning attack potentially at this level. It seems like a very strong attacking potential is evolving here anyway. Even though white's got the e5 square, this semi-open h file, this spells a lot of trouble. The other rook could potentially swing in to help the attack. It seems very, very dangerous. So anyway, bishop g2, not undoubling the pawns, just bishop g2. And we have bishop f8, which does mean the road is cleared here to transfer to the h file potentially. Queen f1, and now knight e4. Putting pressure on c5. This becomes almost like a liability, this knight on c5. White really doesn't want to stub out the rook just to open up the bishop, to have a pawn on c5. It would also mean, you know, the brakes are not on e5 later. We have g takes f5. And I've looked at this game 5 or 6 times. That's just yesterday as well as today. And I find this a bit mysterious what occurs here from this position. Rather mysterious. Leela takes on c5. So clearly the whole c file is going to be tamed if there's a pawn on c5. But isn't that what you'd expect here? Ethereal goes on a piece sacrifice with f takes e6. It does mean that the bishops see sunshine, a very promising position for a while. But does the sunset close on the two bishops? Before we get into that, or how quickly does it close, if we did look at d takes c5, is this so bad, g takes f5? Have I exaggerated the attacking potential of the black pieces here? Clearly not e takes f5, by the way. That's not going to happen because rook takes d5. So g takes f5. Let's say queen e2, bishop g7. It seems as though black evolves an attack from this position, making use of the semi-open h file. So as an example, say even f4, trying to exploit the queen on the g file. Even this is possible, g takes f4. Even this. If white didn't play f4, then black's building up with rook h8 and maybe g4 later. Well, not rook h8 immediately. The queen's looking at h8. But pretty soon, it's going to be dangerous. So let's say f4, just theoretically, is trying to expose the g file as well. So here, you might think, well, what about bishop takes d5? Queen h6 keeps g7 protected, looks at h3, and if bishop takes c6, then here, this is very nice. Black ends up in a winning endgame, basically, where it's a big advantage. If we go back here, instead of bishop takes c6, if queen g2, just to put this on the board, we see a position where black's just a piece up. So let's go back to this f4. G takes, and let's say E takes. So how to try and get the rooks on the h file? Well, queen f6, stops the queen cutting across h8. And here, knight e7. This is just an example. Now rook h8. So once this h file is starting to be celebrated, it seems to be very dangerous for the white king. And this is just an illustration where the rooks double, combine and win principle. And the white rooks are not really combining on anything. They're not coordinated here. They're not so much as the team as the black rooks. And this can go downhill, this kind of thing, quite easily. For example, this scenario is just fictional. But you can see black's got central pawns. c5 is weak. The king side is generally weak. Black's getting a big advantage. So maybe, some of this was simulated, was analysed by Ethereal. It's a mystery, though. I did look at it 5 or 6 times. It's a mysterious piece sack. It does look, for the moment, from a short while, it looks very scary for black, this piece sack. White has the light square bishop without the counterpart, which is something I've raved about, obviously, in many games recently, having a bishop without a counterpart. And it looks ragged, the 2 pawns here. It looks as though this bishop is about to open up. It seems the dynamic potential is with white in many respects. Why is it with black? Black's got the extra piece, sure, but on the knight's just stumbling around here. We see knight cd8, queen g2, king h7. They're holding it together for a moment. A pair of rooks come off, bishop c4, as though, maybe it looks like a pleasant idea to either have bishop d3 or d5. We have knight f7, queen g4. Here, if d5, then that gives up the c5 square, and black does well here, taking off white's bishop pair. There's going to be no problems in that kind of thing. So queen g4, and we have the knight going to g7. A strange position indeed. Should black be able to really convert the extra piece here? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2 pawns for the piece, but these are double pawns, and white has the bishop pair. And white seems to have a majority of pawns in the centre. It's not so easy, is it, though? If the pawns go forward in the centre, it creates blockading squares. You can imagine d5 and e4 create a blockading square on e5. Black's ready with the dark square bishop to blockade on e5 later. So we see bishop d3, rook c8, h4, so volunteering the undoubling of black's pawns, knight h6. This is a tactical transaction now to get bishop e7, but the effect is clear. The pawns have been undoubled. Black's still a piece up for 2 pawns. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. White's bishop pairs, central pawn mobility, don't they count for anything here? We see king h1, and now we see bishop d8. d5, at least opening up the dark square bishop. It seems like a promising idea. Queen f7. We have rook g1. So combining win against g6. But black, before we look at that, if e4, that would weaken f4. And it turns out black can really celebrate f4 going into f4. And that extra piece does seem quite significant. It can be supported. And the 2 pawns and the bishop pair, though, this is a vivid example of a crazy line where why should black be better? It's tactical. It's very, very tactical because king safety, believe it or not, comes in with this h-file also being significant. So knight f5 is possible, for example, here. Black isn't being blown off the board. It seems because of this h-file, black has resources like this. And then bang, knight h3. So it's not so easy to blast black away with e4, it seems. It gives up the f4, and in conjunction with the h-file, it seems as though black holds things together. If d6 is another try, this just weakens that rows. So, rook c5 and then rook h5, and this is just nasty for white's king safety. It's becoming very clear there's a king safety problem here. Things are coordinating, and if here, rook g5, and this check, knight h6, not to get mated on h8, this could backfire. Finally, the bishop does something in this variation. It supports rook h8. But no, it's the knights hold it together, and the queen's just lost there. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. So both e4 and d6, they don't seem to do anything as far as I can tell. So we have, rook g1. It seems logical to combine against g6. It really does. Okay, knight gf5, and then we have e4. This does weaken the dark squares. Knight h4, queen h3. It does look at c8. Okay, the rook moves. And this is very peculiar now. Very peculiar. I mean, the rook, it's been interviewed here. Dear rook on c7, what are your future career prospects? You haven't done much in this game. And it's answering, well, I really want to get on this h-file. How is that even possible here for this rook to get on this h-file? We see a peculiar wriggling of this rook now on c7. And these pawns are kind of pinned, actually. e5, there's queen takes d5, check, because of the king's placement on that diagonal. So it's not so clear-cut as the visuals might imply with the bishop pair and the central pawn mobility. We have queen e3, and now the rook wriggles. It's heading for that h-file, potentially. Queen g3, rook e8. It's ready to roll on the h-file. f4 is played. Rook f8. For the moment, now the bishop's been teased away from h8. And finally, we have rook h8. Why did the bishop do that? Well, f4 is under fire. And on rook f1, maybe that runs into other unpleasant things. It's a very, very complicated position. But there might even be in some variations of g5 and if e5 and knight f5, and it looks as though it's just very, very complicated. But for whatever reason, the bishop relinquished the h8 square, and the bishop finally arrives on this h-file, looking at the king through several pieces, its own king and two knights. But it is essentially looking at the white king. When it was just a positional rook on c7 from earlier, it's now a hack attack rook. We have queen h3. And knight 6 to f5 is played. Really, you might ask, really, what is this? What is going on here? Is this rook already in operation or something? We see rook g2. If e takes f5, queen takes d5 check. And if rook g2, believe it or not, king g7, and the rook is fully functional and about to win material, about to pay back on its investment to get to the h-file. It doesn't even matter about bishop b2 here. So if king g1, check, and then taking some material and then taking the queen. If bishop b2 here, check. Black casually just plays bishop f6. The knight's looking after g6. And white's in big trouble here. Black's given back the piece, essentially, but white's king is getting massacred and losing the queen. So this is quite a staggering development here, if we look at this. So knight 6 to f5. Yeah, it's amazing. On e takes, this position, if we just look at it again with king h2, king g7 again. So we're ready to answer bishop b2 with bishop f6. And the rook's really happy. It's got its career prospect. It's going to win the queen. Knight takes, protecting the rook, winning the queen. Yeah, it's lethal. So anyway, so it's ignored, rook g2. White's crumbling now. Bishop f6 taking out that diagonal. So the rook sits there happily now on h8. So essentially these dangers still lurk. That black is going to casually just play king g7 if e takes, just in time protecting the rook and crumbling the whole diagonal. It's too dangerous. White plays rook h2 and king g7 here. We see queen g4. And now the move a4 is played. Incredible stuff. Bishop c5 is played. If e takes, just to illustrate this painful queen takes d5, it is painful, knight f3 check, and knight takes h2 shows the level of pain we're talking about. So, you know, bishop c5 is played, queen c7, we have b4. If here e takes f5, queen takes c5, this is hopeless for white. And if we just look at this again, if bishop e2 as an example, the queen comes in with a vengeance on the dark squares. It's just hopeless for white. So b4, b6, bishop g1, knight h6, rook c2, queen d6, queen h3, knight f7. And look how the black pieces are all working well together now. Very well visually. Bishop h2 and now knight f5, really nasty. That rook is a real killer rook now. It's a hack attack rook. Queen g2. You know, this rook is as bad as using the London system to get a kingside attack. You play the London system thinking, you know, the opponent thinks you're playing positionally, but this rook's gone from a positional rook to a lethal pinning rook, essentially, throughout this game. So queen g2 is played. If queen g4, then knight e3, and then this variation is no good for white. White's just a rook down, but it's very close to the game, actually, believe it or not. After queen g2, just knight e3. I know it's just crazy. This happens. White gets the queen back, but is a rook down. White's been turned into rubble here, quite dramatically, and I have to say, it's a very mysterious game. I've looked at this game so many times. I just find it very, very mysterious. I'm curious how such, you know, depth of analysis would lead to a piece set which is kind of refuted. The highlight for me is this rook wriggle. For me personally, using that H file, the rook going from c7 to e7 over here to h8. It's incredible stuff, incredible dynamic stuff. And so the game ends here at move 66, white a whole rook down. Leela seems much stronger this time. I think one of the bottlenecks has been reduced. So 2 wins, no losses so far, leading the tournament. This could be a fantastic season for Leela, but, you know, there's the new kid on the block, Stockfish NN. So giving respect to the neural network technology. So the Stockfish evaluations are not being hand trained now. You know, they're being neural networked. So at the time of this video, that has actually won one game, so is close behind, chasing Leela in this division. So a very, very exciting division. And for me, this was a really mysterious game. I quite often like going over mysterious games. What lies beneath here? And I'm only giving you a slight glimpse of what I you know, it's really quite amazing stuff. So check out tsec-chess.com to follow the action. Really high-level chess is being played. Okay, and by the way, I've released a new course, Kingscrusher TV /Opening Tango, which does have some features of dark square weakness provocation. So I kind of enjoyed seeing some dark square weakness provocation in this game. But if you want an entire opening based on mega dark square weakness provocation, Kingscrusher TV /Opening Tango. You can follow my Leela playlist at bit.ly/Leela Chess. My Discord at kingscrusher.tv/discord, where you can come and make game suggestions. And you can come and play me at 5 Days a Move if you want. bit.ly/chessworld, register, and I'll be able to invite you for a game after at 5 Days a Move. So check that stuff all out if you want. And comments, questions, like, share, subscribe with the notification bell. Really appreciated. Thanks very much.